Welcome everyone once again to African Futures. And today we have another exciting episode. And I'm excited to have as my guest today, Martin Masiya, who is going to shed more light around the issue of the future of solar energy in Africa. Now, Martin is an incredible person. I've known Martin for a number of years now, but he is a renewable energy specialist with experience, extensive experience in the field. He's the founder and CEO of Solis Energy, and he's also the project's lead at the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition Youth Action Group. That's a mouthful. And he's also a youth task force member at Renewable Energy Solutions for Africa. Martin, welcome to the call. Such a pleasure to have you.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, Martin, I want us to kick this off and dive into the current state of solar energy in Africa. And I want you to start the conversation by giving us really an overview of the current state of solar energy adoption in Africa and how it compares to other regions in the world. How are we doing as a continent when it comes to, in solar energy adoption?
Right. So I think I'll start by statistics, right? So Africa has the largest, solar continent in the world. So 40% of the solar potential of the world is on the African continent. And this makes Africa the most sun-rich continent on Earth, making it the continent that could generate the most power from solar as compared to all the other continents around the Earth. However, only 1.5% of installed capacity. So out of the 40% that we could potentially generate, we are only generating 1.5%. And this is collective of various solar projects that exist across the African continent, which is, very concerning because we talk about energy independence, right? Which has been an issue particularly after the start of the Ukraine war and everything that has been going on in Ukraine and recently now the Middle East as well. We talk about energy independence, and the main issue there being that Africa is still dependent on fossil fuels and imports a large majority of the fossil fuels that we consume on the African continent. And we want to decentralize that and make sure that we have our own energy sources, but we are not adequately also utilizing this massive, potential for renewables on the continent itself. Yeah.
No, that's quite interesting for you to say, and I mean the statistics are shocking to say the least, and I think there's so much more we could be doing as a continent, and we'll dive into that a bit more as we go through this conversation. And you'd already started mentioning some of the challenges we face, but I wanted us to spend a couple more minutes, really going deeper into the challenges that we are facing when it comes to scaling up solar energy infrastructure in the continent. Why are we not doing it? We have the resources, we have the sun, we have, what you would say, the raw materials needed for this to happen. So what's the challenge? What's the problem?
Right. So I think the largest problem is to do with the technology. So it's one of the key challenges that we face. When we talk renewables, when we talk solar, these are physical technologies that are manufactured and are so distributed across the African continent. However, in the case of solar, when you look at the key manufacturers of solar, be the actual generation, distribution, and storage, you find that all of it is not on the African continent, right? So the biggest manufacturer of solar being China, up by Europe. These are the main hubs where these technologies are being manufactured, even though the main source of the raw material is the African continent. So there's a disconnect there to a certain extent, because then it makes the delivery of the finished product more expensive, which I think is a problem across many sectors on the African continent, not just in energy. We have the cocoa trees, we export the cocoa, and then we import the chocolate. We have, we have the maize, we export the maize, and then we import the cornflakes. It's like that. Yeah. So the situation is no different, with renewable energy technologies and solar. We have the raw materials, we export the raw materials, we import the finished product. The second challenge has to do with manufacturing capacity and the technical expertise that exists to actually, make that happen, even if we had, these factories and plants in place here in the African continent. Much of it is led by the private sector. And our private sector has not really dived much into manufacturing the solar components on the African continent, even though the resources exist on here, because of the technical expertise. So the technical expertise to design the actual, technology itself, and then to design a plant, and then to run the plant is a high value skill, not adequately available on the African continent. And this is partly because of the educational system. So the skills that we learn in Africa, broadly, and the vocational skills, for example, that are imparted in China are very different. Here, if you go to a TVET, Technical Vocational Education Institution, and you want to learn about solar, they'll teach you about how to install it. In China, they're learning like end to end. So they are learning about how the component is designed, how you can configure, very technical stuff like the circuits, how can you operate that? What are some of the machines that are used to manufacture these products, and how can you operate and maintain, and upgrade them? So there's an educational difference. So even, and it's not only Africa, even the US is complaining about the same thing.
Yeah.
They're saying, well, all our tech companies are moving to China. It's not because the cost in China is lower, as people assume it to be, but it's not present. It's not currently now. I was recently listening to something that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, was talking about. And he talks about the same thing. He says, well, the cost of labor in China was low, but that was like 20 years ago. Right now, there's no difference in the cost of labor, but rather the skills that we need to manufacture these high-tech products are available in China. So they have developed the capacity of their technical and vocational institutions such that they're able to that specific training, which provides value to the manufacturing of these technologies. And that's another thing, right? And the third thing is finance. It's easy to talk about finance first, because people assume that once the money comes, but finance follows capacity. So even the financing institutions will take stock of the potential of an economy to absorb the finance that exists in the economy. Yeah. So if they're looking at these different components, such as, well, manufacturing capacity, technical capacity, and so on, then it's very hard to allocate the finance that is needed in order to make the progress happen. So finance is a big challenge. Finance for the manufacturing, finance for companies that are going to invest in, upskilling the labor force, to reach that level. All of these, are not adequately financed, and that's also a challenge. And the last has to do with regulation. So on the government side, right, we often complain that our regulations are usually not up to speed with the rest of the world, while other countries and other continents are, creating frameworks, creating rules, creating laws that enable the adoption of, green tech, that enable the upskilling of the labor force, that enable catalyzing investment in green energy. Africa is still very much behind on that. So the quality of the policies and regulations that we have is not one that induces investments into the green space as it currently stands for a majority of countries on the African continent, even though we are the continent with the most as well for renewable in general. So this is it's concerning, but I think that's the spectrum of the challenges that we face, from the actual panels themselves to the broader, frameworks and laws that make all of this, yeah.
No, I think I resonate a lot with what you're saying, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people tuning in would resonate with the same. And what really excites me also about this podcast is we are not just going to talk about the problems, right? But it's also a space for us to start thinking about what needs to change and how can that change. So I'm excited that we also get a chance to do that later on in this podcast. But now linking to the issue you just talked about in terms of the challenges and the gaps that are there, the flip side of it is there's so much potential for solar energy in Africa. And how do you see solar energy transforming the energy landscape in Africa if some of these things are fixed, right? If we get financing in place, if we get regulatory frameworks that support and promote the adoption and scaling up of solar energy, if we change how we are teaching young people skills around manufacturing, design, and so forth, how do you see that changing the landscape of the continent?
Right. So I think the biggest thing that then happens is around the area of energy access. Globally, 700 million people do not have access to electricity. 600 million of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's potential in as far as the technology is concerned, but then there's also potential in as far as the market is concerned for renewable. If you have 600 million people without access to electricity, you're looking at the cheapest, most easily deployable solution that you can deploy into those areas to make an immediate difference in people's lives and to get people working, because energy is the backbone for of productivity, right? If you don't have energy, then you can't get anything done. So solar is proven to be, right now, one of the cheapest technologies that can be used. There's of sun, like we said, potential on the continent. And it can be delivered at a good price. So when we're looking at it and looking at the potential for solar to transform energy access, activity. So how can it then be applied? Africa's population, of which 80% is in rural areas, and 90% of that 80% relies on agriculture for their livelihood. They can leverage, solar energy for, food production, food processing, food preservation, to increase food security across the African continent, to decrease the level of imports that we're having of, food products into the continent. We can create an internal market for goods and services based off of these products that we're producing. as a result of the renewable people have and can leverage. I'll give you Malawi, for example. Is one where 13% of the population has access to electricity, only 13%. And for a majority of people that are living in rural areas that rely on agriculture, they do not have access to electricity to enable their basic productivity. And so when we talk about farming, potential for increased productivity, even something as a small solar pump can make a difference to a smallholder farm.
Yeah.
But this technology is not easily and cheaply accessible to the households and communities that need these products the most. And so that's, something that is significant. And then we have all the other sectors as well. We have telecommunications sector, which could really benefit a lot from distributed renewable energies as people are able to charge their phones, access the internet, because can be spread out to the vast corners of the continent. We have its potential to support education, because now as people have access to renewables, they have a steady power. Children can study for longer in rural communities. They're not limited by day and night, and so there are prospects. And you link that to access to the internet as well. Their prospects are much more enlarged because they are then more exposed to what is happening out in the world. They have a much broader view of the world, and it's easier for them to access information. So that, I think, across those three key sectors, that's where we get to potentially then change as well happening positively for the African continent. Adoption of renewable energies in general, but solar also, specifically, yes.
No, fantastic. And you touched a bit around technology and how it could be of significant impact to, say, smallholder farmers, and how that could transform the way they farm, they produce food, and so forth. I want us to stay on that tech vein for a bit more and talk a bit about what other technological innovations do you see as key to really, transforming the future of solar in Africa, but not only just solar, but the future of how we do life, how we do business, how we, we're able to do the things we do. You touched a bit about education, how, say solar would impact, on education, because now learners have access to, energy that doesn't limit them to night or day. So I want us to keep on that vein, but really look at some of those, innovations that are key that you have seen, maybe on the market, or that you think we should be looking at, which are really going to, transform how we do things, and possibly talk a bit about AI as well. I don't know if that's something you've explored around AI and energy. What does that mean? What does the future look like there?
Right. So I think one of the biggest trends and one of the biggest technological advancements that accelerated the adoption of solar energy across the African continent is solar pay-as-you-go. So recognizing that a lot of communities that don't have access to energy communities, they do not have the capital upfront to invest in solar technologies. Solar pay-as-you-go is a solution that was touted to then be transformative in the way that people approach energy access. And it has been transformational because it has increased the uptake of solar energy products across the board. But it's not without its challenges, because most of these technologies were sort of like manufactured for the consumer market, right? It then led to a problem where a household, once they face some financial challenges, they'll find themselves in a debt trap because they have to pay for this consumer product anyway. They've locked themselves into a contract. But I believe that solar pay-as-you-go is transformational when you take it and apply it to a productive use application. Because what then happens is that the solar helps pay for itself to a certain extent by enabling agricultural productivity or productivity, business productivity, and so on. If you have a solar pay-as-you-go fridge, you can put it in your shop. Now you're, keeping cold drinks, increasing the sales revenue that you have, and then being able to pay for this fridge. If you have a solar irrigation pump, you're able to farm for at least one extra season. Using the irrigation pump, you increase the income that you have, and that enables you to pay back for the pump. So we need to see how we can adopt solar pay-as-you-go technologies to the productive use concept. And then that's something that will ultimately also increase the uptake of, solar for, much more economical benefit. AI is transformational, and it has a lot of applications, especially around the issue of commercial and industrial solar. So the way that this can work, and the way that this is being explored, is that AI can potentially come in and enable businesses that are using solar to accurately predict the availability of the sun, and so they may be able to much more effectively structure their operations, reliability to the way that they use solar energy for business use. For households, tricky because you don't need that type of predictability, because there isn't much that you're going to do. But for a business, when you have products that need to be processed by a certain time and you have batches ready, you can forecast and be able to say, okay, we are going to do this to increase our activity. We're going to schedule our batches in this type of way to maximize on the power that is available at a certain time. So I think that's one of the biggest transformational applications for AI in the renewable energy space. It can help predict patterns to do with customers. It can assist in developing models for the delivery of energy access products. So on a broader level, it has a lot of applications, but I think it's going to take time for the industry to catch on and actually also invest in it and see how it goes.
Great, and I really love I think the picture you've painted around what AI could potentially do, and I'll be watching keenly over the next few years to see how industries, businesses take advantage of AI to really unleash that power that it has, and I think there's so much potential that is there. But I want us to draw closer to wrapping up this conversation, and I still have 3 more things that I want us to talk about. And the first one of those is I want us to talk a bit about what African nations, especially our governments, need to do now to address the issue of intermittency in solar power and ensure a reliable energy supply. What do governments need to do now to address that issue?
Right. So I think, intermittency, as far as solar is concerned, has a lot to do with capacity and the nature of solar energy itself. So solar energy is not able to inject a significant amount of power to the grid to stabilize it. So what you essentially need is a base load that is strong enough that then enables the solar power to then build on top of it. And that is the way that it's being approached, in various economies. And typically that base load is hydropower, because hydro is more consistent. It's day or night, doesn't matter, hydro is there, and it's all. Other countries are using coal, which is subject to debate anyway, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, but that's one way. So one way to boost the reliability of solar power on a national utility scale is investment in battery storage systems. We have seen that now with the Malawi government signing an agreement with with the Global Alliance for People and Planet and the Sustainable Energy for All to invest in, I think it's around 20 million US dollars in a battery storage system that's going to increase now the base load and the reliability of the solar plants that we have across the country, making power supply more stable across the board. So these are the types of technologies that we can leverage to increase reliability, and then look at how we can get the investments that we need in order to make that happen.
Right. And thinking about that as well, what could you provide insights, and I'm asking this based on the work that you do, and I know you have played such a critical role in not only regional but global spaces as well, in terms of advancing for, increased uptake and scaling up of renewable energy, particularly solar. Now, from that perspective, right, what insights, do you have on what the future of solar energy in Africa will look like over the next decade or two? Where are we heading from how you see it, and what will the continent look like in 2050?
Right. So I think overall we're going to see a market increase in solar across various types of customers that we have. So you have the household customers, you have the businesses, you have the national utilities, and so on, that are all looking to leverage the power of renewable energy or solar to to increase energy access and to increase energy capacity, across the board. And climate change really plays a role in this. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. There's a lot happening as a consequence of our usage and burning of fossil fuels, and we are trying our best to mitigate the effects of climate change by investing more in renewables. Quite recently, the International Energy Agency published a report, and there's another report that was published as well that calls for an increased, uptake or increase in capacity to triple the capacity of renewables, across the world in order to keep below the 1.5 degrees of global warming, in order to stay aligned to the, to the terms of the Paris Agreement. This is very important because year on year, we see the impacts of climate change in our communities. We see the floods, we see all these things that are happening. And in order to mitigate those effects, it's very important that we invest in renewable energies. And because Africa has very low energy access rates overall, one of the key ways in which we can build a sustainable future for the African continent is by investing in renewables, and solar being one of them. Secondly, it's an issue of costs and economies, right? Today, around midnight, some people got a memo. Yeah, some people. and if you didn't get it, you probably saw it. Whether you liked it or not, the price of petroleum has increased by, on average, 45%, right?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the instability of price and the unreliability of price when it comes to fossil fuels, right? When you protract this across a period of 10, 20, 30 years as a business that is solid, you then see how much it's going to cost you if you stick to, for example, having a diesel generator or, having, essentially to power your business operations. It's cost effective in the medium and long term to invest in solar, to invest in wind, to invest in some sort of renewable energy generation. in order for you to also reduce your cost of operation over that period of time. Because customers that invested in solar 5 years ago, as compared to those that invested in diesel generators 5 years ago, their costs are looking much more different now, 5 years later. But that is contingent on access to finance, that is contingent on having the right financing mechanisms in place to enable that adoption. So I think those are the biggest trends that we'll see with regards to action, and then also with regards to trying to reduce the cost of all across the African continent, which will then lead to the adoption of solar.
Fantastic. Martin, we've come to the end of the conversation, but before I let you go, any last words to African leaders, business leaders, individuals who are listening? What do you want to say to them as they navigate, through this journey, through this path towards a sustainable energy future? Any last words to them?
Right. To consumers, I would say that solar has changed since the last time you looked it up. So the technology is much more reliable now. There are much more better offers on the market that guarantee that you supply of power as compared to a couple of years back. So do your research, find out more about solar energy and its benefits. Visit us at solacenergy.com to learn more about what you could potentially do with solar for your home and for your business. For governments and for the broader enabling environment, it's key that finance is available, because these technologies are not cheap, but with the right financing mechanisms in place, they could actually become very much more affordable and practical for people to invest in. So it's up to the private sector, it's up to our banks to be more innovative and be more, open to ideas on how they can increase the uptake of renewable, because then it reduces the cost of energy and increases energy uptake across the continent.
All right, fantastic. No, Martin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience and insights on the future of solar energy in Africa with us. It's been such an enlightening conversation, and I'm sure our audience will agree that it's really been loaded with a lot of great insights around what we can expect when it comes to solar energy. So thank you, Martin, for coming and being a part of today's episode.
All right, thank you as well. This was fun.
Great. All right, everyone, it's a wrap for this episode of African Futures. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the future of Africa. And don't forget to subscribe or review our podcast and help us reach a wider audience. So thank you for listening. Until next time, this is your host, Willson, and catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.